So Cathy, first of all, what is Catharine Lumby Associates?
Well, it's an organisation which works with corporates as well as not-for-profits and the public sector to assist organisations in cultural change and to help them ensure that they have a safe, fair and balanced workplace for everyone involved.
I mean, you've been an academic pretty much the majority of your career.
Yeah.
So what led you to start a consulting business, a sort of social enterprise, if you like?
Well, because part of my area of expertise is gender equality, and it's something I've pursued both as a journalist and as an academic, I was often approached by organisations who wanted me to come and talk to them, wanted me to review their policies and protocols. I have a legal background as well, so I bring that into the mix of things, and often do research into their cultures to find out what's going on. I mean, in this country at the moment, I think we're going through a bit of a reckoning about things like sexual assault, sexual harassment, racism, bullying. All of these issues are really high on the agenda and the radar now. And organisations, even just in risk management terms, have to protect themselves, but they also have a duty of care, of course, to their employees to make sure that everyone in the workplace is treated fairly and respectfully.
So the motivation, I mean, obviously in academic world you can come up with great ideas, but is it a motivation that relates to scale and impact? What really led you to go, okay, I can see it's topical, but I'm going to take it to the corporate sector?
Well, I think just the fact that in many corporate cultures, people want to make a difference, they want to change culture, but they don't know how. And I suppose that one of the things that Catharine Lumby Associates does is bring research and an evidence base to taking the temperature of the culture, and on the basis of that research, implement education programs which aren't just tick the box. A lot of education programs really are about people coming in and giving people a list of do's and don'ts, whereas what we do is engage people in scenarios and really get them to work through often grey areas that arise. Because, you know, when we go to work, we really bring our whole selves, but often we don't notice that. So people's gender, their sexual orientation, their cultural background, all of these things are part of who they are. And it's about, I guess, getting people to feel comfortable about being themselves, but also knowing what trigger points there are for other people. So a really simple example of this would be, there's good research showing that men often speak over women in meetings. And a lot of women don't know how to manage that scenario. And a lot of men, good men, don't realise they're doing that and that they might be silencing people around them. So part of what we do as a team, is to get evidence on what's going on in the workplace, make recommendations about education programs, and roll those out in a way that's very real world for people. It's not artificial. It's not just about a whole list of policies that are written and they sit in a drawer and someone pulls them out when the building's on fire, essentially.
Well, it's interesting. I think I've heard you say in another context, or maybe I read it, that in your academic life, you don't want good ideas just to sit on the shelf. Is this sort of an example of that in practice?
Yeah, like for me, I want to put wheels on ideas. And there is, you know, research, if it's just academic and it's just a set of journal articles and it sits on a shelf and looks shiny, is irrelevant. I mean, it's about how in practice do we use what we now know around preventing bullying, preventing discrimination on the basis of gender or race, and all of those important issues which most people care about, but they don't often know how to go about it.
You've mentioned a couple of interesting things so far. You talk about sometimes people don't act until the building's on fire.
Yeah.
When you're brought in by organisations to work with them, what state are they typically in?
Well, generally there's been incidents that have triggered them to come to me and say, you know, can you help? Essentially, often, you know, it could be something like a sexual harassment lawsuit. That's a fairly common one. Or, you know, so often it is that there's this recognition that they've got a cultural problem, but they're not quite sure what the size or shape of it is. So it's about diagnosing that and then working with people, and I guess using the goodwill that most people have. They just often don't know how to deal with it. And I'll give you another example. So one of the scenarios I used recently with Telstra was around a guy called Steve comes into an interview for a job in IT, and he's wearing a suit and gets the job. 2 weeks later, Steve turns up in a frock with makeup on, right? And you're all sitting around the lunchroom. Do you say anything to Steve about that? Is it ever okay to comment on someone's appearance? What pronouns do you use?
I mean, I'm thinking, what bathroom do you direct him or her to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you, a lot of the kind of educational work that we do is about coming up with scenarios which resonate with people and giving them language to put around it. And, you know, it's like team sport, I suppose, that you practice what you do on the field all the time. People rehearse scenarios and strategies. But when it comes to interpersonal communication, a lot of the time people want to do the right thing, but they haven't rehearsed it. They haven't thought about what it feels like for the other person. And often, you know, they get caught in the moment because these situations at work arise in the moment. And if you haven't thought them through, then you can be caught off balance and say or do the wrong thing and really upset someone.
So you sort of mentioned often it's a reactive circumstance that triggers a recognition of the need. So I guess in a way that leads into an obvious answer to my next question, which is, you know, what's the most important bit of advice you could give to a board of directors in relation to taking action on diversity and inclusion?
Well, be more diverse yourselves. One of the big problems that we've got in Australia still is that board culture is dominated by white straight men, to put it bluntly. Now, nothing wrong with them. I'm about to marry one, but it's the first thing in an organisation is you've got to do a diversity test. You might have all these values, but if you're not living them, then people will know that. So getting a diverse group of people around a boardroom table gives you different perspectives on issues.
I mean, I think there could be lots of different ways that diversity manifests as well, though. I assume it's not just you know, gender and race. I assume it's perspectives, it's ways of thinking and so forth.
But I guess when I'm talking about diversity, I think we all come with values, we all come with our own lives, and really nurturing diversity, yes, means listening to a diverse range of ideas. But in order to listen, you've got to open up the conversation for people, and some people will feel less empowered to speak than others.
What's an example of an organisation that you've worked with that's actually had a significant improvement as a result of the program of work?
Well, I'm going to say the National Rugby League, who I worked with for over 15 years. And I did a number of large research projects looking into the off-field culture and off-field behaviour. As we know, that's still a problem in, you know, isolated incidents. But I've got research, and on the basis of the research, we rolled out education programs tailored to these guys, using the language they use, using the scenarios that speak directly to what goes on off the field. And there are ways of doing that, and I mean, it's education delivered by an ex-player teamed up with an expert educator. So people that the players can relate to. And the research, you know, does not reflect what you see on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. The research shows that there has been a big shift in the middle ground of that organisation when it comes to attitudes to women, respectful behaviours, understanding what real sexual consent looks like, all of those areas. That doesn't mean, and it's true of any organisation, that you're always going to bring everyone on the journey. There will always be a hardcore group of people who don't care about doing the right thing by other people.
So you've mentioned two very different organisations, I guess, on the outside, you know, a big conglomerate like Telstra, you know, a high octane a body collision sport like rugby league.
Yes.
I guess I'd like to sort of understand, what it is that you do that is different through Catharine Lumby Associates, yet still relevant to such diverse organisations.
Yeah, I would say, John, that I think the first thing is we're evidence-based. So we don't go in and assume to know. What we do is work with senior people in the organisation to take the temperature of the culture, and you can do that through anonymous surveys. You can include focus groups in your work. And really understanding the language and the culture that you're working with. So you've got to tailor any education and any recommendations to the real world people are inhabiting. Once you've identified the problems, then you can start. What we do that I think is very different is we put together hypotheticals or scenarios, if you like, that people can relate to, and it's in a language and a context that will involve them and engage them. And so I would, say if, in the pre-COVID days, you'd have a room full of 100 people. I'd put them into groups of about 5 to 8, give them scenarios, get them to workshop them together. One of the members of the group would then report back to the room. You put the whole scenario up and get people to reflect. And what you find is some people will bring new perspectives to how to deal with a situation, or they might say, well, guess what? In that scenario, that's happened to me in this organisation, and they will share their experience.
I've got a feeling that until recently, corporates, maybe political leadership, everyone would have looked and said, yeah, well, that's the rugby league, that sort of thing happens there, but it doesn't happen in my world. Do you think there's been a kind of recognition and a shift in terms of leaders of society, leaders of business, leaders in politics, understanding that actually maybe there are a few more issues than they realised? Yeah,
well, Parliament House is probably a good place to start there in Canberra. And I think absolutely. I think that in the past, there are, of course, leading organisations and male champions of change when it comes to cultural diversity, and I am thrilled about that. But I think that a lot of it's been driven by risk management, and you see a lot of, for instance, in the sexual harassment area, a lot of women sign non-disclosure agreements, and it's kind of tidied up by the legal team and the HR team. But I think that now there's a recognition that actually when you've got a triple bottom line, not only are you doing the right thing by recognising and fostering and encouraging respect for difference in your organisation, it's also good for business, because we know that more diverse organisations are more creative and innovative. And so there's a business bottom line to this as well.
So in concluding, what would be your message today to corporate Australia, to the boardrooms and the C-suite? What would you say people need to be thinking about and doing right now that they haven't done before?
Well, I think the first thing that's really important that's not done well enough is take the temperature of your culture. The second thing is avoid a tick-the-box approach to education. Allow people to speak more openly and acknowledge that in human behaviour is a messy business, right? None of us are perfect. And so it's about saying, yeah, you've got your hard legal issues over here. You've got your kind of HR risk management issues. Sure, everyone's dealing with those. But in the middle, what you need to do is create a space for people to talk openly, to make mistakes, to share their experiences. And that's how you have an enabling culture for people to work in. And you will get a lot more out of your employees if they're happy to come to work and they feel able to bring their whole selves to work.
So in a way, I think what you're saying is that the distinction I hear here is between, if you like, transactional HR and legal management and genuine cultural evolution.
Yeah, genuine cultural evolution doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It involves, I guess, what people would call soft skills, communication skills. And I think assisting people to be more confident, to be good bystanders, to call out the behaviour they see when they know it's wrong. A lot of people feel uncomfortable doing that. So if you create an environment where from the top, leadership is saying, this is the kind of culture we want to create here. This is the place we want people to feel comfortable working. And as I said, it makes sense from a business point of view. But I think that ethically we've gone through a bit of a reckoning about these issues. Australia's in a process of change broadly in society, and our corporations should be reflecting that.
Thank you.
Pleasure.